The government in discussion with mainland authorities to open the high-speed railway ticketing system over there to Hong Kong people.
Good evening and welcome. The government is in discussion with mainland authorities to make it easy for Hong Kong people to buy tickets for traveling on the high-speed rail network on the mainland. But as Caleb Long reports, a solution may be at least 6 months away.
The Express Rail Link promises to provide a faster and more convenient means of cross-boundary transport. But this may not always be the case. For example, there still aren't any overnight trains that go to Beijing and Shanghai. Passengers who want to save money on hotel accommodation expenses by taking an overnight train will have to go to Guangzhou first and then take a sleeper train to their destinations.
We have to realize that for those sleeper trains being operating at night in the mainland, they are a little bit of lower speed, roughly about 250 kilometers per hour. When they arrive at one station, the only thing they need to do is probably to change your platform. My experience in the mainland was roughly about 30 minutes would do.
The government is in discussion with mainland authorities to open the ticketing system to Hong Kong people.
We have to work out with the mainland counterparts to change the entire, the system configuration and the information required for named passenger. We are expecting it might take some 6 months or more. I might be up to a year or more for that to be materialized.
Meanwhile, Chief Secretary for Administration Matthew Cheung commented on the lowering of the expected daily passenger flow of the Express Rail Link from 110,000 to 80,000. Cheung said the adjustment would prevent the government from suffering financial losses. Under an operating agreement with the MTR Corporation, if the actual passenger flow falls short of the projected figure by over 15%, the government will absorb 70% of the losses incurred. So the lower the projected passengers figure, the lesser the chance the government will have to pay up. Caleb Leung, TVB News.
Pope Francis is in Ireland, where the first cases of abuse by Catholic priests were uncovered. The pontiff said the church must end sexual exploitation, but it's what he didn't say that many are focused on. Peter Coveas explains.
Pope Francis marked the first papal visit to Ireland in almost 40 years by acknowledging the failure of the Catholic Church. He vowed to end the repugnant sexual exploitation of children and the clergy. He prayed for sexual abuse victims before the candle of innocence. The pontiff then met privately with victims of the scandal.
We're looking for unqualified, wholehearted apologies. And certainly we got one today from the Pope, but whether that will translate into a huge official apology from the Church is another matter. But it's whether that translates into actual actions. That's what really matters to us.
Others were far more critical of the Church.
This was the moment when he could acknowledge that cover-up and the Vatican City-State's responsibility for it. And he fluffed it. Yet again, he completely refused to acknowledge the role of the Vatican and its responsibility.
The Pope was greeted by both cheers and jeers as he traveled through the streets of Dublin. The pontiff ended the night in front of more than 80,000 faithful, saying it was a time to celebrate the family. But as more cover-ups emerge, critics want action and not just words from the Church. Peter Coveos, TVB News.
Australian Foreign Minister Julie Bishop has resigned from the cabinet of new Prime Minister Scott Morrison. She will be replaced by former Defence Minister Marise Payne. Bishop had been foreign minister since 2013. She said she would move to the backbench and had not decided whether to contest the next election. This comes 2 days after Morrison won a Liberal Party leadership vote and became Australia's 6th Prime Minister in less than 10 days, or 10 years that is. Bishop contested Friday's vote but was eliminated in the first round. Today, Morrison praised Bishop. He said she remains an inspiring role model for women in Australia and around the world.
Julie has made an extraordinary contribution to Australian public life, and I've consulted her also as I've gone through the process of forming this new team. She will be a passionate campaigner in every sense of the word, as she always has been for the Liberal Party, into the future. And I'm sure there are many of us, in particularly my female colleagues, who will continue to look to her as a mentor and a great supporter and encourager in our joint efforts.
One of Russian President Vladimir Putin's harshest critics has been detained in Moscow. Opposition leader Alexei Navalny was taken to this police station in the Russian capital. He was later admitted to hospital with a suspected broken finger. The arrest comes ahead of next month's planned nationwide rallies to protest the government's decision to raise the retirement age. Navalny rose to prominence thanks to his investigations into official corruption. He published an investigation on Friday alleging $29 million was stolen in procuring contracts for the Russian National Guard, which is headed by Putin's former bodyguard.
A weekend getaway has turned deadly for at least 16 people in Bulgaria. This is what remains of a tour bus that flipped over on a highway and fell more than 20 meters down an embankment. 18 other people were injured and rushed to hospital. The vehicle was going to a resort near the capital city, Sofia, when the accident occurred early Saturday. The Bulgarian government has proclaimed Monday a national day of mourning.
Huge fire broke out in a building under construction in Switzerland's biggest city, Zurich, on Saturday. There were no reports of injuries. The building is close to Zurich's main train station. During the fire, there were 2 explosions inside the building. Construction work had been underway there in recent months. The blaze left much of the structure in danger of collapse. The square in front of the train station and surrounding streets was closed to traffic, disrupting part of the city's tram services. Authorities have yet to determine the cause, but say there's no evidence of any crime.
And still ahead in our newscast, the Labour chief speaks out on maternity leave on his blog. In Egypt, prosecutors probing 2 British tourists' sudden death says no gas leak was found in the couple's hotel room. And highlights from a military music festival in Moscow.
「簡單嘅小確幸嚟自屋企每個角落，細微嘅地方都用滴露做好家居防菌保護，溫柔守護家人健康，唔會錯過每個相處時光，無條件嘅愛，時刻守護滴露。」
Welcome back. Africa is doing better than Hong Kong. At least that's what Secretary for Labor and Welfare Lau Chi-kwang said about the city's maternity leave with pay. As Christy Lung reports, he says the government can consider using its general revenue to subsidize employers in extending the maternity leave from the current 10 weeks to 14.
What could be better for new parents than spending more time with their newborn babies? However, new mothers in Hong Kong are entitled to only 10 weeks of maternity leave with pay. This has remained unchanged since the 1980s. During their maternity leave, the women receive 80% of their wages and their employers have to foot the expenses. 83% of African countries are doing better than Hong Kong in this regard. That's what Secretary for Labor and Welfare Lau Chi-kwang said about the city's policy on his blog. He called for a review to extend the leave to 14 weeks, as suggested by International Labour Organization. But who will bear the extra costs incurred by the extension? Paying through the employee's labour insurance is the most common practice in European countries, but given the difference in taxation systems, the Labour chief found it too complicated for the city. He cited Singapore as an example, adding that the government's taking on the expenses could be a way out. In Singapore, for the first 2 children, the mother's first 8 weeks of wages during their maternity leave will be borne by their employers. The governments will take on the wages during the later 8 weeks. For the third child, the governments will take on all the expenses during the 16 weeks of the maternity leave. Though employers welcome the Singapore model, they still have reservations on the arrangement.
The government has subsidies on paycheck. However, we still have the problems on how they will arrange on the maternity leave extensions period. They have to find a replacement for the job responsibility.
And unions suggest the government should bear the cost solely during the transition period in the event that a new maternity leave policy is adopted locally.
We suggest the government may take a pioneer or a pilot scheme to launch extended maternity leave to 40 weeks.
Taking into account the number of newborn babies in Hong Kong each year, he believes it will cost the government an extra $300 million in subsidies for the employers. Christy Leung, TVB News.
The think tank today is urging the government to carry out simultaneous consultation on political reform and national security legislation. Pinky Wong tells us more.
A report by think tank Hong Kong Vision suggested the government to create favorable conditions for proceeding with political reform and Article 23 legislation. The group is led by former LegCo President Zhang Kyok-sing.
We believe that the two tasks are very closely related. On the one hand, we hear voices, we hear people from the pan-democrats camp saying, we don't want Article 23 legislation until after we have universal suffrage. The central government is obviously worried that without Article 23 legislation in place, opening up the post of chief executive and all the seats in the legislature to popular election in Hong Kong could be risky.
Other recommendations included clarifying China's constitution and its applicability in the city, as well as the rights and duties of Hong Kong permanent residents as Chinese citizens. The group also asked the government to review the basic law to fit the needs for the development of one country, two systems. The think tank hopes the people of Hong Kong can evaluate one country, two systems objectively and break the vicious circle of mutual suspicion for the best of the city. Pinky Wong, TVB News.
5 people were rescued after the sailboat they were on capsized in Sai Kung. It happened at around 4 p.m. near Jin Island. 3 adults and 2 children fell into the water and a passing ship rescued them all. Firefighters and the Marine Police were deployed to the scene.
The number of locally contracted dengue fever cases so far this year remains at 26. With 9 patients having lived in or visited Cheung Chau, Chief Secretary for Administration Matthew Cheung announced there would be island-wide mosquito control work starting tomorrow. That includes disinfecting all Cheung Chau schools before they resume classes next month. Cheung also noted that while dengue is now under control, there is still a possibility of new cases.
Many suspect a poison gas leak is what killed a British couple who suddenly died at their hotel in Egypt on Tuesday. But the top prosecutor in Egypt insists that's not possible. The prosecutor says a probe to determine what killed John and Susan Cooper found no toxic or harmful gas leaks in their room in the Red Sea resort of Hurghada. Local medics insist they died of a heart failure. However, the prosecutor is awaiting results of forensic tests on samples taken from their bodies to find more answers. Other British tourists at the same resort reported falling ill from what they thought was either food poisoning or a gas leak.
We were sick. It was the last thing. We were happy. What went wrong? How did this happen? Why did this happen? I think that there was something either in the air conditioning or something like that. Something wasn't right. We went to bed. We got up in the morning. The room was boiling hot. That's not air conditioning. Something came through that system, I think.
U.S. President Donald Trump has ordered the State Department to redirect more than $200 million in aid for projects in the West Bank and Gaza to programs elsewhere. Critics believe this could put more political and financial pressure on the Palestinian leadership. The Gaza Strip is under Israeli and Egyptian blockades because of its Islamist Hamas rule. Earlier this year, Palestinians were outraged when Trump recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital and moved the U.S. embassy there. Jerusalem remains one of the core issues in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Several aid organizations say the cuts in U.S. economic aid will make a bad situation worse in the region.
Hawaii may have escaped a hurricane, but it still took a beating from torrential rain. Drone footage shows Tropical Storm Lane left massive flooding on the Big Island of Hawaii. Firefighters rescued 39 people from rising waters after the storm dumped 114 centimeters of rain over the past 3 days. That's the fourth highest amount of storm rain to hit the United States since 1950. In Honolulu, hotel guests are back to enjoying the beaches as shopkeepers reopen for business. Over to Moscow for a military music festival. That's where military bands from around the world stage a colorful performance on the Red Square in front of the Kremlin. The festival is called Kremlin's Savior Tower. The event included over 1,000 performers from 15 countries. The bands offered up classical pieces and a variety of military marches. The festival was first held back in 2007. And that's our news.